my name is Sebastian. I'm a first year in Grays, and I'm studying math, computer science, and physics, and my capstone presentation is on the declining sleep duration among adolescents. So the main problem is that we see that adolescents are not getting enough sleep, and there are two main effects here at play. The first is that over time we see that adolescents are getting less and less sleep, but secondly, we see that across age, adolescents are the ones who are getting the least amount of sleep, which is really bad because they're the ones who need some of the most sleep. So, how big of an issue is this? Well, we see that this is actually an international phenomenon. Yes, in the United States, we see that sleep decreases over an hour from age 13 to 17, but also in countries like New Zealand, we see a similar effect. And in fact, over time, we see that across 20 countries, sleep decreased by an hour across the century, but in places like Australia, we see that tracking sleep in adults, there was no change, indicating that this is mainly an issue among adolescents. In fact, in the US, 80% of seniors get less than 8 hours of sleep per night, which is a really bad thing for their health. So, the history of the issue again, from 1905 to 2008, we see a 1 hour decrease of sleep among adolescents, and we also see that it affects different demographics differently. For instance, girls get less sleep in adolescence, African Americans get the less sleep amongst all racial categories, so we see that it affects different people in different ways. But what we all know is that there are health and safety consequences to the individuals no matter what. So these include depression, sleep apnea, emotional destabilization, and general sleepiness. And this ties into one of the key concepts that we learned from the very beginning, from January 23rd, from the first lecture, that sleep is vital. If we don't get enough of it, we get a lot of these health consequences. And the impact on society is really also detrimental. We see that there's higher levels of depression, worsened academic performances, higher incidences of car crashes, and more frequent sleep-related diseases. The third of these is, again, a key concept that we learn about in March 19th in our 8th lecture that tells us that fatigue is the second leading cause of fatal motor vehicle crashes. And this is very much the case among adolescents who, when they don't get enough sleep, it will lead to higher incidences of car crashes. So, past interventions. We've seen mainly two types of intervention, individual and structural. On the individual level, we have advice saying to set earlier bedtimes, to not drink caffeine later on, and to spend less time on our screens. There have also been structural attempts, that is, like higher level impacts, such as setting later school start times and setting nap time in school. The former of which is, again, a key concept that we learn about in our lecture 9 on March 26th that tells us that early morning start times in high school induces sleep deprivation in high schoolers, which is again a big issue, and by pushing the start times later, we would minimize the effect. Reason why these have not worked on the individual level, there's always going to be a more pressing issue, so circumstances always outweigh sleep. If you have a homework assignment due the following day, you are going to take the caffeine and going to stay up. But moreover, there's actually hormones that naturally push our sleep time back. Again, these are two key concepts that we learned about in the 6th lecture on February 27th that tells us, first of all, the 26th concept, that light is very much a synchronizer for our endogenous circadian rhythms, and secondly, that artificial light pushes or keeps us awake. So we have these hormones that naturally push our sleep back, but we also have screens, which also intrinsically pushes us to sleep less. The structural solutions have also failed because of bus schedules. In particular, the buses can't arrive later because they have to service middle and elementary schools. So the solution that I propose is two-pronged, and it's again in line with the two attempted solutions we've had in the past. First, go to sleep earlier, and the way to do that is to mandate phones to reduce brightness and blue light past 9 p.m. Secondly, we would have students wake up later, and that would be to push back school start times for high schoolers. Now, why it would work. Studies repeatedly show that light at night negatively affects sleep, specifically blue light. Removing this chemically trains the brain to sleep earlier. Now, it is infeasible to outlaw phones past 9 p.m. That's not going to happen. But if we have these phones naturally reduce blue light or reduce their dimness, then it's going to help the situation in an actually feasible way. Secondly, waking up later. We've seen numerous studies both in class as well as ones that have research that tells you that later start times doesn't mean that you are going to stay up the same amount that you are gaining. As a result, you go to bed slightly later, but you wake up way later, which creates more sleep. Now, the timeline for implementation. There are two major elements, but You would have major phone corporations make default screen settings to low light after 9 p.m. Now, this is a setting that you can enable on your phone already, but ideally this would be automatic when you buy the phone so that the majority of students would have it right when they buy their phone or they get their phone. And moreover, you'd have schools simply start later. And the timeline is that both of these are pretty attainable in the next few years. If we pass laws in the United States, for instance, to have these corporations have their default settings to blue light after 9 p.m., it would naturally extend internationally for the phones because these are big players internationally. Late start times are mostly local, but can be implemented also very quickly. Now, the barriers to implementation: phone companies might resist the change, or there might be legislative issues. The second issue in terms of the school start times is that bus schedules force schools to start early, so it's very hard to change these schedules insofar as the buses can't change. How to combat these barriers? Well, first of all, sleep improvement is universally supported across party lines, so it doesn't really hurt anyone to pass these laws. And moreover, it doesn't really hurt the companies to set their default settings to have low light after 9 p.m. So it really is something that is feasible in the near future and something that we could pass and have these phone companies do. In terms of later school start times, we would swap the bus schedule with the middle and elementary schoolers, because high school is early because middle and elementary schools are later, but small kids naturally get up earlier, so it would make no harm if the high schoolers were the ones having the later start times and the middle and elementary schoolers have the earlier start times. So we would essentially swap the bus schedules. And then the problem would improve. As mentioned before, light emission and blue light programs blue light programs brain to stay up, and late start times lead to more sleep. Thus, when you implement the solution, you'll have less depression, better grades, fewer car crashes, better emotional regulation, and overall a better society. Here are my references, and thank you for listening.